My name is Jim Brink. I'm the chair of radiology at Mass General Brigham, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by Betsabeh Madani-Hermann, who is global head of research for Philips, Chris Mansi, co-founder and CEO from Viz.ai, and Dimitry Tran, co-founder of harrison.ai. I think we have a wonderful panel for you this morning, and we'll jump right in with some questions to get our juices flowing about sort of the outlook for AI. And we'll begin with Betsabeh. How do you see AI reshaping the imaging workforce, and will it reduce burnout or create new skill demands?
Thank you, Jim. So radiology today is like a beautiful ensemble. It's just not really coordinated and is missing harmony. It's why radiologists are continuously sharing that they are facing burnout. It's why they are complaining about their workload that's increased by 40% over the past decade alone. And what I see the future looking like is more like they don't become data clerks, but they are the conductor of a beautiful orchestra, where everything is really in harmony together.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from down the way?
Since we're talking about the world, I think it's very interesting to look at the capacity that we have in different parts of the world, because I think having different capacity result in different pattern of usage of AI. I recently moved to the US from Australia, and one of the things that I hear a lot from US radiologists is burnout. Yet the US has the highest number of radiologists per capita of any country in the world. So imagining the pressure that US radiologists is on and multiply that by 2 times, you have the UK, who have half the number of radiologists per capita, or India or China, who have a 10th. So I think it's very interesting that we're at this particular time, but we need to really look at it from a global perspective, and I think the burnout problem is very real, and AI is the only solution, I think, inside at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I'd add, thinking about burnout, you have to think about what is the radiologist's job today, what will it be in the future, and what things can the radiologist rely on technology to do, what skills do they need to take on. And we're seeing the radiologists play a much bigger part in the broader care continuum of the patient. So it's not just about the read, it's ensuring follow-up care, etc. And I think AI might have a role playing broadly beyond imaging into care coordination.
Okay, thank you. Chris, let's keep going with you. And I'd like to ask, what does a successful AI imaging strategy look like in 2030? And what milestones must be achieved to get there?
So Jim, 2030 is quite a long way away, and the pace of change today, as I'm sure we're all aware, in artificial intelligence is astounding. If we look at what we were using things like ChatGPT for last year versus this year, it's been an exponential change. And so in 2030, it might be hard to imagine. I think there's 2 potential worlds. One where we enable AI to not only help us with reading images, reading the EMR, listening to patients, but also one where we allow it to take action on patients, so prescribe in surgery, because 2030 is a long way away. That world is actually very hard to imagine, particularly when you're planning your strategy. So I'll stick to the world where there's not the policy change to allow an AI doctor. It's still an assistant to what we do today. Medicine is a team sport, first of all. So I think the first thing you have to do when planning your AI imaging strategy is don't send to the AI and don't send to imaging, send to the patient, right? And think, right, how do we improve patient outcomes across the whole remit of diseases that we as a hospital or an outpatient setting are caring for. And when we're thinking about data, we're not just thinking about imaging data, we're thinking about multimodal data and how do we combine them. And so, I think a successful imaging strategy in 2030 will take advantage of the huge improvements that we'll probably see by then, or undoubtedly see by then, but we'll be broad in how it looks at technology and data. And we'll send to the patient to speed them to diagnosis and treatment much faster than ever before. It will also have to focus on breaking the barriers of the walls of departments, radiology, neurosurgery, cardiology, down so everyone works as a team, and also breaking down the walls of the hospital. So You know, if you're in Mass General Brigham, you're not thinking about the patient that's in front of you, you're thinking about the entire population, not just of Boston, but the greater Massachusetts area. So that you can start to leverage the technology to democratize care and improve the outcomes of your population who are in more rural settings, etc. And so it's going to, how you think about the technology is going to be framed by the lens you take. And I'd encourage policymakers to be thinking through that lens and healthcare leaders to be thinking through the lens of the entire population that you're looking after.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on. Dimitry, how do you think AI will improve patient outcomes, reduce treatment delays, or enhance care coordination?
One of the saying that I really like, Jim, is the future is already here, but just unevenly distributed. So if you're looking at example of AI adoption where in health system like the UK, where capacity constraint had led to much faster adoption of AI relative to other countries, we're seeing, for example, in our case, 12% more treatable lung cancer being realized in Scotland. So not only the use of AI, not only efficiency gain in reducing reporting time, but we're now all the way seeing to patient outcome being changed on adoption of technology. So I think we are scratching the surface at the moment. We're starting with easier modality like X-ray, CT, but as we see more and more adoption of AI across the board, we'll see more patient outcome being moving the needle on that one. But I would like to come back to something that Chris said before, which is what the future could look like. And I think I very much agree with you that it's going to be, I think a word, Jim, you used before is integrative diagnostic. I think I was in a conference that you shared that concept. It's not just imaging, it's going to be pathology, it's going to be cardiology, it could be a lot of this multimodal data coming together rather than just medical imaging alone, AI making an impact.
Yeah, and it's going to be precise, right? So it's not going to be thinking about lung cancer in general, it's going to be thinking about EGFR mutation positive lung cancer and having a totally different way, a totally different pathway for those patients than a different type of lung cancer patients. And I think AI really does allow us to do that at scale and broadly, really in any hospital setting.
All right, let's go ahead and pivot now maybe to talk about adoption. And Betsabeh, I'd like to ask the following. Although the number of FDA-approved AI algorithms has grown exponentially, clinical adoption has grown at a much slower pace. What do you perceive to be the primary barrier?
Of course. FDA adoption is akin to getting your driver's license. Just because you have the permission to drive doesn't mean there's a highway there. So there's no highway, there is no way of getting somewhere you need to go faster, or even at all. So what are the 4 barriers that I see is integration, accountability, economics, and trust. And what do those 4 things mean? So when it comes to integration, it's important to know that today, less than 40% of what is approved by FDA is actually integrated into EHRs and PACS systems. That's a pretty impressive number. And it's less than 40%. When it comes to accountability, about 3/4 of radiologists aren't really sure where the liability sits. And so there's an important question there to solve. If you are putting AI as part of the system and something goes wrong, that shared accountability that's needed is not 100% there today. The economics. We talk about things becoming faster, cheaper, more scalable, access is granted for more people all around the world, which is fantastic. But sometimes reimbursement models don't actually reward efficiency. Yes, you may be able to put more patients through a system, but there is no actual reimbursement code for, hey, we became 10% more efficient today. And then finally, trust. About half the patients out there report that they think applications of AI is going to take time away from them spending with their physician. It should be the opposite. It should be that they think, okay, well, the technology is making their life easier, but they may think that, and some people, I mean, the new generation may actually don't mind just interacting with a machine, but in many pockets, the population wants to have that human touch still, and that trust needs to be built. So those are the 4 categories and 4 pieces that I think, if addressed well, then we have more of a shareable percentage of what goes through FDA actually also becomes integrated and adopted.
Jim, I would say that I think that actually the adoption has actually crossed the chasm. Like with what we offer, We have 1,800 hospitals in the United States, and because it's typically the hospitals in the busier areas, it covers 230 million lives. It's 2/3 of the US population. I think what Dimitry is doing is hugely adopted internationally. And so I think we're getting to the point actually where there's very few hospitals that haven't adopted some form of AI. Now, what is the penetrance in the hospital of the different specialists using the technology? How well is it working? That's the next step we have to take. But I don't think healthcare has been slow to adopt AI. I actually think it's been at the forefront. And recently, we've seen just a pace shift in how quickly these technologies are being adopted in multiple different specialties. And so I'm very optimistic, actually, that there'll be a catch-up with what the technology promises and what it's actually delivering.
Good, thank you. Dimitry, your thoughts about clinical barriers to adoption?
I think the FDA may not be the right benchmark here, because we were encouraged to be controversial, so I'll say something controversial here is, I think the number of indications that are approved through the FDA is been inflated. Because if you're looking at the number of repeated approval, a number of special 510K, if you're taking those out, the actual number of indications from companies that innovative like Viz doing is in the tens, not in the hundreds that we're looking at the moment. So if you're looking at something as simple as a chest X-ray, there's AI for pleural effusion, for pneumothorax, for lung nodule. How about the 100 other things that radiologists look for in a chest X-ray? Or for CT brain, there's AI for brain bleed, for stroke. How about fractures? How about obstructive hydrocephalus? There's so many other things. And I think the paradigm that we have with FDA at the moment is narrow AI, one approval per indications. Whereas what we're seeing in Europe, in CE mark, is an AI that covers all chest X-ray, 120 or so findings, or in CT brain, 130 findings in a single submission. So I think the reason why we see the adoption has not been high or as high as we would like to see is because the approval so far has been very narrow. One of the radiologists friend of mine said, how fast would you think my email writing would be if the AI that I use only spell check for letter A? Not very, right? And that's exactly how AI in the FDA world for chest X-ray and CT brain and CT chest is at the moment. Whereas if I go across the pond to UK, I can use an AI to do A to Z. So that's why adoption is higher in the UK, because the product is more useful. So I think the key barrier at the moment is the change in moving away from narrow AI to more comprehensive AI is required for faster adoption, at least in the US.
Good, thank you. Let's pivot now to AI training. And Chris, I'd like to ask you about image data. We know that it's critical to algorithm development. How have you overcome hurdles to procure and aggregate data necessary to develop new models? And really, what is the state of maybe a federated learning to resolve data sharing issues? Or how would you see that from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the key is trust and partnership. So we were the first company to get an AI FDA clearance back in 2018. Now we've had billions of images go through our system, so the data problem solved. But back then, yes, we needed a data set to train the model, to improve the model. You have to get it through the FDA with a certain standard, and then you have to continuously improve it in order for it to truly make a clinical difference. And back then, it was about making sure your product delivered value for the hospital and the patient, so that's the partnership piece, and that you act with trust. And so there was a ability to essentially federate the data by going to different hospitals. We did a lot of work. I founded the company out of Stanford, but we did a lot of work in the southeast of the country, in Tennessee and in Georgia, because we wanted to make sure our data sets were diverse, right? And they weren't just from Stanford or UCSF or Mass General. And so I think when you're starting out in this world, getting that data set, getting that diverse data set is a challenge, but as long as you've got a product that is going to deliver value for the hospital and for the clinician, I think it's reasonably easy to overcome today. One of the sort of challenges now is, these pathways, these AI-driven pathways, are becoming more precise, in some ways more complicated in terms of the input data. And so you need a longitudinal data set. You need to understand what might happen to patients, lung cancer example, like depending on what their genetic profile might be. So you can't just take a CT scan and say, fantastic, we found an incidental pulmonary nodule. That's not particularly useful for that patient. There's so many other things that need to be solved to improve patient outcomes for that lung cancer patient. And so, like, as we continue on this innovation journey, like trying to get richer data sets, trying to get longitudinal data sets, trying to find ground truth data sets that are, you know, cutting edge, the way the future should be, continues to be a challenge that we have to overcome.
Great, thank you. I see a question that's come in from the audience germane to this particular topic, AI training. So let me go ahead and take it, which is, what are opportunities and challenges towards open source AI, i.e. model weights, anonymized data, for medical imaging? Is there a future with open source AI in healthcare? That's open for anybody.
No. I think it's very, if you go to some of the, competition website, and even I know the RSNA every year have competition on open data set and open source data, and the model can be built on something that works very well on that particular data set. But to what Chris was saying is that as you go further and further into deployment, you find that it's the edge case that gets you. So just because you have an AI model that works well on mammography, on PE, on an open data set, then you go into the real world and you realize the difference between a Siemens machine versus a Philips machines, realizing that some artifact in a particular model that was made 10 years ago, that you need to make sure your AI performs just as well as certain patient population in Indonesia that have particular underlying genetic conditions that they have different image result. So I think something that is, unless you go through a commercial effort and spending the investment that we're talking about is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, we don't talk about open source drug, open source medicine, yet we're talking about open source AI, because I think in AI, it's easy to get something that works 80%. It's all in the last 20% that matter. So I'm sure someone maybe smarter than me can figure out how to make open source work, but so far I haven't seen a way for that yet.
Yeah, I think unfortunately you're right. It's easy to build a model today that detects disease in a brain scan, right? That's not the problem anymore. It's both the edge cases and the deployment, so it actually makes a difference for that patient. That is the hard part. And obviously an open source model that is being deployed in the lab setting versus in the real world isn't going to solve those challenges.
I have a more hopeful view for what comes in 2030. 5 years ago, many of us weren't experiencing what we're experiencing today. So as someone who is personally advocate for open source in general, I'm hoping that by 2030 we'll be at a point that the edge cases could be taken care of as well, and we could have a way of dealing with this. I believe in the unknown unknowns that we don't know today that could solve a lot of this.
Terrific, thank you. We have another question from the audience that I think is germane here, and Betsabeh, this may be more directed to you as a major equipment manufacturer, which is when you talk about fusing modalities of imaging and radiology, do you envision integrating different equipment from different vendors into a common software platform, or is this something that needs to be done individually by each company?
I believe that vendor neutrality matters. I think it's a hospital shouldn't really care which vendor they're buying their different machines from. I think it's important for them to be able to care for the patients that they are caring for, knowing that the system at a software level, it's all well integrated. And no matter what sockets from whom there is, you can plug them all together and create a very seamless process.
Great, thank you. Let's pivot now to AI models. And Dimitry, this one's for you. What is the impact of foundation model development in medical imaging versus other areas of healthcare? Will this be a necessary step toward agentic AI and artificial medical intelligence? And have large language models or large image models made narrow AI models irrelevant?
There's 3 questions here, so maybe I'll go one by one. The foundation model is fantastic. I think it is a major breakthrough since we got our convolutional neural network. Now we have something much more general. So at the American College of Radiology conference earlier this year, we got a chance to showcase our technology alongside MGB AI Healthcare Challenge, where we did a Turing test, essentially, where our AI was used to generate report for chest X-ray, alongside other report that's already been written by MGB physicians. and the attendees was asked to pick out which one was clinically accurate, and also which one was the machine and which one was the AI. And the result was very close. So I think we're reaching a stage where AI can take image in and write a report in any style and in the specific format or template that the radiologists care to have in a way that's very close to human. Doesn't mean that it's going to be replacing human in any time soon, but I think the foundational technology is definitely there, at least on plain film, and soon in the 3D modality as well. But to your point about narrow AI, I think we're moving from narrow AI for single findings like lung nodule, brain bleed, and going to comprehensive AI, which is an AI that do CT head, AI that do chest X-ray, and now we're going to generative AI. We recently got regulatory clearance in Australia for generative AI of writing a report. So I think the world is now getting to that stage. When we're going to be able to bring that through the FDA with the current regulatory framework, I think that's the next part of the questions, but it's a very exciting technology.
Thank you. Betsabeh, please.
Just a quick addition to the previous question, because it came from the audience. Whoever asked that around medical device integration, look up MDIP and capsule. This is not new. Medical device integration platform has been there for a while, and I think it might be worthwhile for you to just look into that a bit more.
Good, thank you. Other thoughts about the foundation models, generative AI, and so forth? That's Chris. Any further
I think I agree. It's increasing the pace of innovation and change, and one of the interesting parts of our field is you often have to throw away what you did 5 years ago and replace it with new models and new ways of doing things in order to make sure that you're delivering the quality that the market expects. And so foundation models, in imaging, fantastic. In language, obviously, most of us will be using those every day. Getting those into the hospital setting, I think, is starting to happen and is exciting, but is probably the next frontier of challenges. We talked about 2030. What will we have by then? Who knows? But it will continue, I believe, to exponentially evolve. And as long as innovators continue to adopt and physicians continue to adopt, it's an exciting time.
Chris said something really important here. The unlearning is important in humans. Learn, relearn, unlearn. But that unlearning of the data points that you have and the models there, that also matters. Throw away something that was useful maybe 5 years ago but may not apply today. I think I just wanted to stress that. I fully agree with you.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to regulations. And this is a bit of a gnarly topic. I know, Dimitry, you touched on it earlier. But HHS has struggled to keep pace with AI evolution in the era of foundation models. And how do you think general purpose foundation models, i.e. ChatGPT, will be regulated in healthcare? And how would you distinguish between medical device applications such as image interpretation versus non-medical device applications such as chart summarization? And this is really open to anyone who wishes to jump into this morass, if you will.
Maybe I can go first. I think the whole point of having a medical device is to have an indication for use. So I think it's hard to have a regulation for something as general as ChatGPT, because what is the indication for use? Because you can't validate, you can't put in regulatory or protocols, even pre-market or post-market for something as general as that. So I think what might be more fruitful is a more using the foundational AI as a technology, but for very specific use case. For example, AI to draft normal report or detecting normal report for plain film, taking away 80% of the workload that otherwise would need to be done by human and focusing the expertise on the 20% of patients that really need the urgent and the focus of the clinicians. And to the second part of your question, Jim, I think it's very hard to know when you cross that line from non-medical device into medical device, because summarization is in fact a clinical task. Because how do you summarize without making some assumption and making some prediction about what the reader is going to think? So I think there's a lot of people who want to have a company that is a non-medical device company because you operate with a different set of rules. But I think as innovators, we need to embrace the fact that this is clinical product and we need to be regulated. Recently, for example, in Australia and in the UK, the regulation make it very clear that summarization unless you don't introduce any new fact, will be medical device. Because if you start making diagnosis or making recommendation, that's new information that wasn't in the body of the text. So I think the regulators are catching up and realize that you cannot skirt the rule anymore.
Betsabeh.
I think it's important to regulate by risk and intent rather than blanket statements and blanket rules for things. A tool that is used for triage is very different than something that's used for primary diagnosis. That's something that does patient summary. And that intent matters, that level of risk matters. And so working together, in my opinion, with the regulators, and again, I sit in Europe, so different rules apply there. I'm a Canadian, different rule applies there, and we are speaking to a mostly US-based population today. The rules across the global are so different. I think UK has been trying to decide where they would fall. Is it more on the Europe side or more on the US side? The base of this to me is really about that risk and intent. Every model that gets regulated, everything that gets regulated should really look at that spectrum, because not everything is equal and not everything should be painted the same way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and look, I think the FDA and HHS should actually be commended, because the question is struggling to keep pace. Yeah, the pace is moving so fast, and the last thing you want actually is a government to put the brakes on this medical innovation that, in a way that kills it, because it would, right? The second that you have regulation that's really hard to overcome, that's not well thought through for some of these new technologies, some of the very exciting entries, from the big technology companies like OpenAI, they will stop, right? Because they will run away from that regulation. And so, overall, again, centering the patient, it's good that we're seeing this pace of change. We've had a lot of conversations with the FDA around this, and I think they are aware. It's not something that they're ignoring. They're thinking through frameworks, but they're not jumping in and putting something that's going to be a handbrake on the industry. It's interesting to see that Apple recently just got a FDA clearance, right, for something on the Apple Watch, right? That was predicated on a Viz medical device for ECGs. And the FDA is really starting to think innovatively about how they can get more things through, and I actually really welcome that.
That's great, thank you. It brings us to one more question on regulations, then we have a number of questions from the audience we'll try and get to here in just a moment, but just to close out this topic, I guess the big question really is how do you as a company manage in the face of the uncertainty of regulations yet to come? Do you make your best guess at it and just forge ahead? Do you have watchdogs or signposts you're looking for to know if you need to pivot, or what are your strategies in that respect?
You engage, right? You engage with regulators. I remember getting our first letter from the FDA in 2018, and it was we just submitted an algorithm for stroke triage, and there's this new kind of new technology, and it was 6 pages of just devastation for a neurosurgeon who left his career to start this company. I was like, it's all over, oh my God. And we show up in the offices of the FDA, and within 5 minutes, they had realized what our device was intended to do, why it was going to benefit patients, and they came around to our side of the table, and within 4 months, we had an FDA clearance. And so that was a really stark reminder that you need, the FDA is trying to do good for the US population. Other regulators are trying to do exactly the same for their population. And so you engage, you work with them, and you try and stay in the conversation. Last week we testified in Congress about not just regulation, but also reimbursement. And so as a company, we just try and stay engaged in the conversation.
Thank you.
I completely agree. I'm a huge fan of having your toughest critics at the table with you, because then they help you find the loopholes and the issues and the problems that could occur. And then what comes out of that conversation that's not in silos actually is better. And you're right, it speeds processes up when you're having conversations together.
Terrific, thank you. Let's go. We've got a number of questions here. So one, maybe going back to data sharing, the question is curious about cross-border data sharing to train AI models. Are we seeing openness among nations in doing so to train AI models? Are there advantages, challenges, and risks you can share? And maybe I'll go all the way down to Dimitry, since I think you took the related question earlier. So,
I think the framework for privacy is has been very challenging, and it's going to be getting tougher and tougher to comply even within each of the country. So moving data across borders is even harder going forward. And I think rightly so. Privacy is something that we take very seriously, and I think regulators, for example, in Europe with GDPR, making it near impossible to move data between countries. Even support someone who came in and support the PACS and support the AI need to be in country in some of these jurisdictions now. So I think, unfortunately, the direction of travel is that it become more lockdown rather than more portable between regions. It makes it harder to comply with, but also provide better protection. So this is not a call for individual company. I think it's a call that different governments are making, but the direction of travel we're seeing is that stricter and stricter regulation around sharing data.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, and maybe this is a tough one, and Betsabeh, it's about major equipment manufacturers again, so put your seatbelt on. Will and when do you think we will reach a point where the diagnosis in CT and MR will not require the traditional image to be made at all? Presumably AI can work on raw data points.
So those raw data points have to come from somewhere. I will wear two hats in answering the question. I think I will debate with myself. I'm a physicist by training. I'm a huge Star Wars, Star Trek geek. So as a result, I believe in a future that we may have not seen yet. And I think that would be a very cool thing to explore. But coming back to Earth, coming back to today, the way that even the world of imaging works, other industries are trying to replicate it. So in mining, they are measuring the diffraction of muons hitting the ground to X-ray the planet to see how they can do precision mining in certain places, because you can tell what type of material is under, and the amount of waste that's in mining is mind-blowing. Again, cool things for you to maybe use Gemini, ChatGPT, Cloud afterwards and learn more about. The rest of the industries that may also be looking, there is 1,000 words in an image. And so I believe that those images are really important today. Now, again, as someone who's a sci-fi reader and a physicist, I would say the world is very open to many things. 10 years from now, I don't want to eat these words today. I do, however, want to say there are some really cool things in CT and MR that are actually changing. So, for example, you can take images a lot faster. You can position a patient a lot faster. You can make your image reconstructed utilizing AI if there was an issue with it, if there is foreshortening in an image. And a lot of those things, you can use data and AI to actually make the process more seamless. You don't have to necessarily call a patient back in for a second image if there is some issues that have been there. So those are the things that maybe are more tangible for today's world.
Good, thank you. A couple more questions about workforce, and these actually may be germane to me, so no pressure down there. And these two go together. One is any comments regarding some medical students being cautioned about going into radiology residency because they may become obsolete by AI in 10 years or so. And the related question is, as someone about to enter the radiology workforce, what is the most important AI considerations one should have regarding the future of radiology practice, and how best can future practicing radiologists contribute to AI in practice? And I would say that the future of radiology remains extremely bright, but it'll look different as we evolve with AI. Right now, from my perspective, we just can't get AI fast enough. We are crushing work burdens. If you think about it, we practice radiology the same way we've practiced it for 100 years. Meaning a human looks at an image and dictates an impression, findings, and report about that image. And that hasn't changed since maybe 120 years. And yet the volume of work, the number of images we have to look at, the scope of and risk of human error looking at thousands of images on a case-by-case basis is enormous. And if you think about how much AI has contributed to helping us in our daily life and so many other domains, we need that same contribution in our field. So I do think the future is very bright, and if you look back at the history of other diagnostic tests, some have come and gone because automation has helped replace them, but those specialties are still very much alive and well. I'll date myself a little bit, but automated EKG readers were just coming to the fore when I was an intern a long time ago, and there's a rich world for cardiology. In terms of things to do and ways to contribute. In pathology, pap smears are now read largely by machines, but boy, the pathologists are very busy doing the things that are the cutting edge things in their domain as well. So I hope that answers those two questions. And any comments from anyone down the line?
I couldn't agree with you more. It's amazing. I mean, why be in a sleeper industry where you can be in one that is changing daily and it puts the coolest tools at your disposal? You get to experiment, you get to grow with it. There is an immense opportunity here for the future of radiology.
Yeah, I agree. Like, until we've cured all disease and we're treating all patients consistently, right, we need to stop worrying about like tools doing our jobs. We need them to do as much of our job as possible so that we can do more for our patients.
Great. We have just a few more minutes, and we had one fun last question we wanted to ask everyone, which is, what are some of the tangible use cases for AI to improve patient care? Stated another way, what are some of the cool things you're working on? And we've got 3 minutes left, so rapid fire, 3 minutes each, or 1 minute each, if I may. So Betsabeh.
I'm in charge of our breakthrough innovations and exploratory innovations at Philips. In our breakthroughs, we have robotic procedural automation that uses AI and robotics in image-guided therapy. It's very cool. And clinical data intelligence, which we're actually working with one of our partners is Mass General. So MGB and us are working hand in glove in this with near real-time data. And then obviously there is some of the stuff that's happening. And I mean, I'm a huge geek about MR, and so Smart Speed, which like makes things 3 times faster, is really cool. I'll stop there. I think that's 1 minute. There's a lot more.
Yeah, so Viz.ai, we're reasonably unique in the depth of our focus on care coordination. So beyond just the department of say, radiology, or I'm a neurosurgeon, outside neurosurgery, or cardiology, or oncology. And you know, from our origins, when we were in stroke, we had to really, really care about every single step in the process. Every minute mattered, because in stroke, 1 minute is 2 million brain cells or a week of disability. So the thing I'm really excited about right now is our incorporation of multimodal data sources. So the imaging, genetic testing, that we might trigger liquid biopsy tests, right, in oncology. We're summarizing the EHR and pulling that into the interpretation, incorporating some of the amazing work that some of the ambient companies are doing into what we're doing. And it's moving towards being that full AI doctor assistant for pretty much any disease. And you know, we've done it in maybe 10 or so of our indications so far, but my sense is that this could be for any patient who comes into the hospital, and probably move into primary care and really any disease going forward. So very exciting about the precision medicine around multimodal data and really getting patients to the right place.
I want to end where we started, which is we need about 110 radiologists per million people. The US have 90. The UK have 45. Australia, where I came from, we have 70. India have between 2 and 4. China have about 5 to 7. That is the scale of the problem that we're facing. We have a huge capacity issue. We're feeling that in the US, we're feeling that globally. So the cool things that we're doing is we know that every radiologist are being asked to go faster by the head of the department, by the patient, by the referring clinicians. And when you go faster, you need support. You need a way to make sure that you catch everything. So I think the impact and the use case that AI improving accuracy is proven globally. AI help pick up more cancers, picking up more brain bleed, making sure that you don't miss pneumothorax. I think that is proven, and that is off-the-shelf solution. What's exciting for us and what we're working on is, to what Jim said before, is that radiology has been practiced in the same way for 100 years. You look at an image and you dictate something. We are now getting to a stage where you look at the image, the draft report already drafted for you. Depends on where you are, maybe that draft going to go straight to the other clinicians because you don't have time to look at it. Or if you have time, then you just sign it or make a very small edit. So in partnership with MassGen, and we have a booth at the emerging technology room over there, we are showcasing that AI now is capable of drafting the report. And that's really going to help to close the capacity gap, either the 10 to 20 radiologists per million gap that we have in the US, or the 20 times gap that we have in India or in China.
Great, thank you. We're at the end of our time, and please join me in thanking the tremendous insights of Betsabeh, Chris, and Dimitry.